We call for full implementation of the provisional measures ordered by the ICJ relating to the proceedings brought under the Geneva Convention. Finally, Bangladesh reiterates its strong support for an end to Israel's occupation of Palestine and for a lasting and permanent solution that ensures the establishment of a sovereign and independent Palestinian state along pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Nous allons maintenant procéder à la liste des orateurs des institutions nationales des droits de l'homme et des organisations non gouvernementales. Je donne la parole au Palestinian Independent Commission for Human Rights.
President, among with all the dreadful crimes, crime against humanity, and the live-streamed genocide in Gaza, Israel continues to escalate its violations by systematically withholding the bodies of Palestinians it has killed. In 2024 alone, it seized 192 bodies from the West Bank, bringing the total to 646 held in mortgages and cemeteries of numbers. This does not include the hundreds of victims from Gaza whose fate remains unknown, while families are denied the right to bury their beloved ones with dignity. Among the withheld bodies are 59 children, 67 prisoners who were killed or died in Israeli detention, and 9 women. Since October 7th, Israel has also subjected thousands, including women, children, and medical personnel to enforced disappearance under the so-called unlawful combatant law, stripping detainees of all legal protection. This is a war crime and a blatant violation of international law. We call on the Human Rights Council to demand the immediate return of all withheld bodies, pressure Israel to disclose the fate of the disappeared, and ensure accountability for these grave violations. The dignity of the dead is a fundamental human right, and the world must not remain silent. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Defense for Children International.
Mr. President, the lack of accountability is a core reason why the State of Israel has been able to carry out its campaign of genocide against the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip and pursue its project of annexation in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. For decades, Israeli forces have systematically killed Palestinian children in huge numbers without consequence. The end of this systemic impunity will save the lives of countless Palestinian children and their families. As the only Palestinian human rights organizations focused exclusively on children's rights, we have thoroughly documented violations of Palestinian children's rights for decades. In that time, we have continuously advocated for justice and accountability for these rights violations, and we can say with confidence that there have been no meaningful measures of accountability for perpetrators. Israeli soldiers know that they can kill Palestinian children with impunity and not face any professional or legal consequences. Now, as Israel and its officials are finally facing the beginning of justice at the world's highest courts, some countries are choosing to continue to embolden impunity. Israeli forces will continue to kill Palestinian children without limit until world leaders support and enact strong measures of justice and accountability. We strongly urge all member states to protect the integrity of investigations by the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court that aim to hold perpetrators accountable, including condemning sanctions and other punitive threats or actions towards members of the court, and use all available means to demand Israeli authorities uphold Palestinian children's rights as outlined in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which the State of Israel has ratified. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to United Nations Watch.
Hi, Commissioner. My name is Loy Ahmed, and I come from Yemen. May I ask why your report mentions Israel 188 times, yet fails to mention the Islamic regime in Iran even once? How can you speak about the conflict while ignoring the party that has armed, trained, and funded terror proxies like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, who have been bombing Israel thousands of times? Why don't you mention the Houthis in Yemen, who have spent millions of dollars firing missiles at Israel instead of feeding my starving people? I ask the UN, the Arab League, and everyone who has been raising the Palestinian flag since October 7, where is the flag of Yemen? In my country, 500,000 people have died in the last 10 years, the biggest famine and humanitarian crisis in modern history. Why does no one care when 500,000 Yemenis die? What about Sudan? In less than 2 years, more than 150,000 people have been killed. Where is the flag of Sudan? What about Syria? 500,000 Syrians have been killed. Where is the Syrian flag? High Commissioner, why is it that when Arabs kill millions of Arabs, no one bats an eye? Where is the outrage? And where are the protests? And why is Qatar sitting here as a member of the Human Rights Council when they host the Hamas terror leaders in luxury hotels?
Thank you. I give the floor to Roland Center.
The world now knows Palestinian savages murdered 9-month-old baby Kfir.
Sorry. I have to interrupt, and I invite all speakers to use language that is commensurate with the dignity inherent to our discussions here on human rights. Everyone has the right to express their views, but this should remain within the appropriate framework and terminology. As I said yesterday, tolerance and respect must be the guiding principles of the Council's work, and I will not tolerate disrespectful language. With this in mind, I give the floor back to this video statement.
Brother Ariel and their young mother Sherry Bibas with their bare hands. Palestinian barbarians mutilated their tiny
bodies. Stop the message, please. As I just said, the language used in this room must adhere to the rules of dignity and respect inherent to our discussion. The language that's used by the speaker cannot be tolerated. It exceeds clearly the limits of tolerance and respect within the framework of this Council, and I therefore give the floor to the next statement, the Badil Resource Center for Palestinian Residency and Refugee Rights. It's a joint statement, also by video.
President, international accountability or its opposite, impunity, do not happen organically or in a vacuum. Impunity is granted through the lack of action, and accountability must be imposed through practical measures. To uphold the principle of accountability, including the obligation of the international community to provide international protection, Badil calls on all states, individually and collectively, to impose political, economic, and military sanctions against the Israeli regime to hold it accountable. For over 76 years of ongoing forced displacement and transfer, colonization, and apartheid, and the ongoing genocide in the Gaza Strip. For the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip and the reparations owed many times over to 9.17 million Palestinian refugees and internally displaced persons. For its perpetual refusal to adhere to its obligations, including ensuring the protection, operation, and full access of UNRWA to fulfill its mandate. Only sanctions can ensure an end to the impunity that the Israeli colonial apartheid regime enjoys, that the UN and its member states fulfill their obligations, and that the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination and return are put into practice. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Institute for NGO Research, also by video.
As we've come to expect, the Accountability Report promotes false claims, ignores aid diversion, and erases Hamas atrocities. This year's version parrots false casualty data from Hamas, sanitized under a new Ministry of Health euphemism. Again, the report conflates combatant and civilian deaths to conceal the truth. Yet again, the report hides Hamas's fighting tactics in Gaza. The word tunnel appears nowhere in the report. The report continues to cover for UNRWA, the ICRC, and aid NGOs that for 18 years turned a blind eye while Hamas stole taxpayer money to turn all of Gaza into a military base. Yet again, the report gives a free pass to Hamas's sponsors Iran, Turkey, and Qatar. When will these actors be held accountable for Hamas murder and mayhem? The report promotes the Gaza starvation lie, as if the entire world has not seen Hamas's depraved ceremonies held in front of braying mobs, where apart from the poor hostages, not a starving Gazan is in sight. And most egregiously, the report erases 9-month-old baby Kfir and 4-year-old Ariel, who were stolen on October 7th to the terror layers of Gaza, where they were executed in cold blood and where their bodies were paraded in one of the most disgusting and horrific spectacles of modern times, while hundreds of Gazan children were brought to watch and cheer it on. Mr. President, where is the accountability to be found here?
I give the floor to the Palestinian Initiative for the Promotion of Global Dialogue and Democracy.
Commissioner, once again, this Council convenes as Palestinians across historical Palestine endure ongoing land expropriations, mass killings, imprisonments, and state-sanctioned settler terror. The Gaza Strip, which endured 15 months of bombardment and an all-out genocide, is now facing an even deeper humanitarian crisis, while the same brutal tactics used in Gaza are being replicated on a smaller scale in the West Bank. Israeli military attacks, Airstrikes, sieges, and mass arrests are intensifying, particularly in the northern West Bank, where 40,000 Palestinians have been displaced and at least 70 have been killed since the start of this year. As Israeli military actions continue to escalate in size and impact, so too do attacks by state-backed settlers, who continue to carry out attacks and expropriate more Palestinian land. Meanwhile, the blockade on the Gaza Strip, after 15 months of genocide, is preventing Palestinians from rebuilding their destroyed homes, leaving women in particular vulnerable. This is not a sudden crisis, but rather the continuation of a long-term agenda aimed at consolidating Israeli control. With an increasingly aggressive Israeli government and the growing influence of far-right elements, the prospect of full annexation in the West Bank seems more imminent than ever. Allowing Israel to continue with its violations without consequences only gives the green light to continue its course, especially in light of the ICJ's ruling on genocide and the provisional measures laid out by the ICC. What is needed is concrete action and concrete steps of international accountability. Until then, justice for Palestinians who face these violations for decades will not be realized. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Jerusalem Institute of Justice.
Mr. President, how much longer will this Council turn a blind eye to the truth? The latest report by the High Commissioner is just not biased. It is a clear distortion of reality. It condemns Israel for defending its people while downplaying the barbaric atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th. Over 1,200 Israelis were slaughtered in their homes, entire families burned alive, women raped, children torn from their parents. Yet, this report reduces these horrors to nothing more than a passing remark, appalling and entirely wrong. Where is the outrage? Instead, the report is obsessed with demonizing Israel's response, ignoring the painful reality that Hamas uses Gaza's civilians as human shields, diverts humanitarian aid for terror, and rejects every ceasefire that would have saved lives. Israel's right, its duty to defend its citizens, is dismissed, while Hamas war crimes are met with soft language and excuses. This report is not about justice. It emboldens terrorism while vilifying the only democracy in the Middle East. It ignores the suffering of Israeli victims and betrays the very principles this Council claims to uphold. Enough is enough. The time has come for this Council to stop enabling Hamas and start demanding accountability from those who commit crimes, not those who fight to survive. Thank you.
I give the floor to the Palestinian Return Center.
Palestinian Return Center would like to thank Mr. High Commissioner and also highlight some important elements in the report. These include Israel's massive atrocities committed against Palestinians in Gaza, which amount to the crime of genocide. In regard to the occupied West Bank, the report notes the spike in Israel's killing and violations of human rights, which include collective punishment, gender-related violations, arbitrary detentions, torture, and ill treatment. It also importantly finds that serious concerns persist about the capacity and the willingness in the Israeli justice system to ensure accountability and its compliance with international standards. Israel has consistently failed to open investigations in cases where there is evidence of unlawful conduct by Israeli occupation forces. We emphasize the report's recommendation to ensure that all Palestinians displaced from and within Gaza are allowed to return to their homes by creating safe conditions and providing adequate alternatives to those whose homes have been rendered uninhabitable. Thank you.
I give the floor to the International Federation for Human Rights Leagues.
Thank you. FIDH thanks the High Commissioner for the presentation of his report. For decades, Israel has implemented a series of discriminatory laws, policies, and practices to establish and maintain an apartheid system based on racial domination and oppression over the Palestinian people. In parallel with its genocidal war on Gaza, enabled by the inaction and sometimes the unwavering support of third states, Israel has exploited the wartime context to launch an unprecedented assault on Palestinians in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. FIDH's Palestinian and Israeli member organizations have documented a dramatic rise in human rights violations and international crimes, including the unlawful killing and forcible displacement of Palestinians in the West Bank, restrictions on their freedom of movement, state-backed settler violence, hundreds of arbitrary arrests and administrative detentions, and the torture of Palestinian detainees. Since the start of the Israeli military operation on 21st January, redirecting its military aggression to the West Bank, at least 45,000 Palestinians have been forcibly displaced and 33 have been killed, including 12 children. These mass human rights violations and international crimes underscore the entrenched impunity that allows Israel to perpetuate systematic violations without consequences. We call on states to recognize and address Israel's apartheid system, including by supporting the reconstitution of the UN Special Committee Against Apartheid, to comply with arrest warrants issued by the ICC, to take immediate action against Israel's settlement enterprise in line with the ruling of the ICJ, including by instituting a ban on settlement imports and imposing sanctions on settlers, and to cease the sale or transfer of arms to Israel. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Al Mesan Center for Human Rights.
Mr. President, High Commissioner, the atrocities in Gaza are not stopping, and the need for accountability is stronger than ever. As we speak, the people of Gaza endure one of the coldest weeks in recent memory. 6 Palestinian newborns have frozen to death as Israel continues to commit acts of genocide, including the deliberate obstruction of life-sustaining humanitarian aid. There is no accountability for Palestinians within the Israeli legal system. Decades of systematic injustice have shown that Israel's domestic mechanisms serve to shield perpetrators, not deliver justice to victims of international crimes. Investigations, on the rare occasions when they occur, are designed to absolve rather than convict. The Israeli legal system has never delivered justice for Palestinians and never will. Over the past year, the International Court of Justice has issued 3 provisional measures orders addressed to Israel. The court has also issued a landmark advisory opinion affirming the illegality of Israel's continued presence in the Occupied Palestinian Territory. Yet, Israel continues to violate these rulings with total impunity as the international community fails to enforce them. In a long overdue step, the International Criminal Court has issued warrants of arrest against the Israeli leadership, marking a critical moment in the pursuit of justice for Palestinians. However, impunity will persist unless ICC state parties ensure these warrants are executed. Attacks on the ICC are an assault on the entire international justice system and must be met with a firm and united response by the 125 state parties to the Rome Statutes. Justice delayed is justice denied. The time for action is now. Thank you.
I give the floor to Amnesty International.
Mr. President, for over 16 months, the world has been witnessing shocking levels of dehumanization, death and destruction in the occupied Gaza Strip, where Amnesty International found that Israel has committed and is continuing to commit genocide against Palestinians. Israel continues to arbitrarily arrest scores of Palestinians across the occupied territory, subjecting them to horrific detention conditions, including torture and other forms of ill treatment. In the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, state-backed settler violence and Israeli military operations have resulted in killings, unprecedented destruction of civilian infrastructure, and unlawful transfer of Palestinians. Millions of people across the world have been incessantly protesting to demand justice for Palestinians. Yet, many states have remained defiant to these calls, often actively silencing pro-Palestinian solidarity, thus undermining the universal value of international law. International courts and human rights bodies, including this Council, and the whole international legal system are under attack. Amnesty International urges states to take immediate action. They must uphold international law by imposing an arms embargo on Israel, supporting the International Criminal Court and implementing its arrest warrants, and by complying with the International Court of Justice's orders on genocide and its 2024 advisory opinion declaring Israel's occupation unlawful. All mandates dealing with the current crisis must be adequately supported. Palestinians' rights must be protected.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. Ceci était la dernière intervention qu'il nous est possible d'écouter. Et je redonne maintenant la parole au haut-commissaire aux droits de l'homme pour ses remarques finales. Vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Just want to offer some concluding remarks and observations in response to the debate, but also to answer the couple of questions that we have received. As you know, that for more than 15 years, my office has monitored, reported, and alerted on the human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territory and the wide-ranging violations that stem from 57 years of military occupation by Israel, 17 years of blockade and closures of Gaza amounting to collective punishment, and the long-standing patterns of institutionalized discrimination and oppression of the Palestinian people in the occupied territory. In these reports, we have made numerous recommendations to member states to act. And in fact, I remember very well my first address to the Council in March 2023, where I've asked my colleagues to come back with the recurring findings of all these recommendations. And I have to say, and I had to conclude then, that most of these findings were unanswered. And it's important to bear this in mind as we look to the future. Over the past 16 months of the conflict in Gaza, we have monitored, reported, and warned again on grave violations of international humanitarian law, international human rights law, committed by all parties to the conflict, and we called on all parties and member states to ensure full respect for international law and accountability. This has included calls for ensuring urgent compliance with the orders for provisional measures issued by the International Court of Justice and with the advisory opinion that the International Court of Justice issued last year. In doing so, my office has reported on violations by Israel, the PA, Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups applying the same human rights standards. Despite severe access restrictions to my international staff in the occupied Palestinian territory, we are continuing within those resources to document, report, advocate and bear witness on the ground. We do this in an impartial and objective manner, applying standard methodology. It is absolutely critical for the international community, obviously, to address the conflict's root causes, to insist vis-à-vis both parties that the current ceasefire holds and that negotiations on its next phase continue, to ensure the effective protection of civilians and the respect and the implementation of the rulings of the International Court of Justice. It's also important to act to support accountability for all violations, whether delivered through national institutions, through universal jurisdiction, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, and or other processes. While it is not within my office's mandate to make judicial determinations as to individual criminal responsibility, victims of gross violations of international law have the right to an effective remedy, including reparation. With regard to UNRWA, and the UN position has been absolutely clear about this, is indispensable in addressing the critical needs of Palestinians, given it's the only entity with the mandate and capacity to ensure the delivery of assistance at the scale and breadth needed, including through operational support to other UN entities in the delivery of their humanitarian assistance mandate. UNRWA is not just an aid provider, it also embodies the commitment of the international community to address the fundamental and unresolved right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. Even though the legislation has taken effect, it's critical for member states to continue providing political and financial support to UNRWA. On the West Bank, I've, in my opening remarks, found very clear wording based on the analysis where we indeed have seen the use of unnecessary and disproportionate force against Palestinians, the restrictions to movement, but also the displacement of tens of thousands of people, but also the continuous settlement activities. And again, international law is very clear, and the International Court of Justice has found clear statements to this effect. And we just have to, again, call on the respect for international law. On a more general level, I'm deeply troubled and worried, and I condemn the dangerous manipulation of language, the disinformation, and the resisting, and we need to make sure that we resist all efforts to spread fear or incite hatred, including abhorrent, dehumanizing narratives, whether they're insidious or explicit. My office will continue to work for justice for every victim and survivor by establishing and documenting the facts and standing firmly for accountability and the rule of law without exception. In the meantime, I reiterate my plea, my urgent plea, for the ceasefire to hold, for each phase to be implemented by both sides in good faith and in full, and for all of us to do everything in our power to build on it in order for the occupation to end and for lasting peace, where the Palestinians have been able to exercise their right to self-determination, and both Palestinians and Israelis to live in equal dignity and rights. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Haut-Commissaire. Ça nous amène à la fin de ce dialogue interactif. Je tiens à remercier le Haut-Commissaire pour sa participation. Nous allons prendre une très brève pause avant de commencer le dialogue interactif renforcé sur la situation des droits de l'homme en Érythrée. Merci. Excellences, Excellences, distingués collègues, je vous prie de prendre vos places. On va continuer. S'il vous plaît. Merci. Nous allons maintenant procéder au dialogue interactif renforcé sur les droits de l'homme en Érythrée, conformément à la résolution 56/17. Permettez-moi de souhaiter la bienvenue à nos distingués intervenants, Madame Ilse Brandes-Keris, sous-secrétaire générale aux droits de l'homme. Merci d'être là. Monsieur Mohamed Abdel Salam Babiker, rapporteur spécial sur la situation des droits de l'homme en Érythrée. Bonjour et merci d'être là. Monsieur Abdom Seraï, chargé d'affaires de la mission permanente de l'Érythrée auprès de l'ONU et d'autres organisations internationales à Genève. Et Monsieur Johannes Gebreviet, représentant de la société civile. La liste des orateurs sera close dans 15 minutes. J'ai l'honneur de donner la parole à la sous-secrétaire générale pour sa présentation. Madame, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Excellencies, I would like to update the Human Rights Council on the human rights situation in Eritrea since the enhanced interactive dialogue in 2024. According to the government, steps have been taken towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, namely in the areas of education and health. In 2024, the government, in partnership with the UN system, reportedly provided essential health services to more than 1 million newborns, children and women. Eritrea reports 95% immunization coverage among children. The authorities also report that there were 2,351 schools in 2023, up from 1,930 in 2015. Enrollments at the primary, middle and secondary levels have also reportedly increased. Gender parity is reported to have been attained at primary level, and efforts are being made to increase girls' participation at higher levels. Eritrea further reported that it had conducted a mapping study of girls who had undergone female genital mutilation, FGM, in 2024 on 1,086 villages, which revealed that only 2.3% under the age of 5 and 4.4% of girls under 15 had undergone FGM. Currently, 12 of Eritrea's 67 subzones are FGM-free, according to the government. Eritrea also ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in December 2024. I recognize the good work being accomplished by the UN country team in support of the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals for all Eritreans. Our teams in Nairobi and Addis Ababa are ready to support Eritrea to implement the commitments undertaken last year during its Universal Periodic Review, including those on peace, justice, and on supporting stronger institutions. But despite these reported improvements, serious concerns remain. Eritrea continues to subject citizens to indefinite military service, contrary to international human rights norms and to calls from this Council and other human rights mechanisms. Within the context of the system of indefinite forced conscription, other grave human rights violations are also of concern, including torture, sexual and gender-based violence, and abusive labor practices. The system further compels many young people to flee the country on perilous journeys, exposing them to high risks of sexual violence, trafficking, and other forms of human rights violations. Eritrea has so far not heeded this Council's call to limit the national service to the statutory period of 18 months. In addition, no steps have been taken to stop the inhumane practice of punishing family members for the actions of draft deserters. More broadly, our office continues to receive credible reports of torture, arbitrary detention, inhumane detention conditions, enforced disappearances, and restrictions on the rights of freedoms of expression, of association, and of peaceful assembly. Many politicians, journalists, religious believers, and draft deserters are held in incommunicado detention. Detention without trial remains the norm in Eritrea. Mr. President, Eritrea has so far not undertaken any credible steps to reform its legal and justice systems in line with international standards. Neither have we seen any evidence of political will to tackle impunity for past human rights violations, including those documented by the Commission of Inquiry in 2014 and 2016, nor the more recent ones by the joint OHCHR Ethiopia Human Rights Commission investigation team in 2023 for serious human rights violations committed by the Eritrean Defense Forces in the context of the Tigray conflict. This impunity continues to embolden perpetrators of human rights violations. In the current context, there is no likely prospect that the domestic judicial system will hold perpetrators accountable for the violations committed in the context of the Tigray conflict and in other cases. Moreover, the Eritrean Defense Forces are in violation of the cessation of hostilities agreement signed in November 2022 that called for the withdrawal of international forces from Ethiopian territory. Our office has credible information that Eritrean defense forces remain in Tigray and are committing violations, including abductions, rape, property looting, and arbitrary arrests. I call for the immediate withdrawal of Eritrean defense forces from Tigray. Excellencies, against this backdrop, Eritrea's engagement with human rights mechanisms is all the more important. Eritrea was reviewed by the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child earlier this year, which noted some progress as well as challenges in several areas, including freedom of expression, religion, and corporal punishment. Our office calls on Eritrea to extend full cooperation to international human rights mechanisms, including the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea and the relevant thematic special procedures mandate holders, namely those who have requested a visit, including the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, the Special Rapporteur on Torture, and the Special Rapporteur on the Rights to Freedom of Peaceful Assembly and of Association. Our office also calls on Eritrea to submit overdue reports to the Human Rights Committee, the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and the Committee Against Torture. We stand ready to work with Eritrea to implement in good faith its commitment to strengthen our engagement. This includes work on the 5 areas identified jointly following our last technical visit in May 2022, namely 1, enhancing rights as part of a transformative justice system, 2, the harmonization of indigenous or traditional laws in line with international and regional human rights norms, 3, support to a regional conference on traditional justice, 4, enhancing the rights and protection of persons with disabilities, and also 5, capacity building on effective engagement with UN human rights mechanisms. The office urges member states to continue encouraging and facilitating Eritrea's engagement with the office, the Human Rights Council, and its mechanisms. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne maintenant la parole au rapporteur spécial sur la situation des droits de l'homme en Érythrée pour sa présentation.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to address you in my capacity as the Special Rapporteur during this enhanced interactive dialogue on Eritrea. I recognize Eritrea's increased engagement with some universal human rights mechanisms over the past year, including its participation in its fourth Universal Periodic Review and its review by the Committee on the Rights of the Child. I also welcome Eritrea's ratification of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I am encouraged by these developments and hope they reflect Eritrea's willingness not only to engage at the international level, but also to take action to improve the situation on the ground by implementing the recommendations of various human rights mechanisms. At the same time, I regret Eritrea continues to ignore my request to meet with the government representatives to visit the country. I reiterate my willingness to engage with the Eritrean authorities in a constructive spirit. Your Excellencies, the reality is that Eritrea continues to face a grave and long-standing human rights crisis, characterized by the repression of fundamental rights, impunity, and complete lack of access to justice for victims. The widespread and systematic suppression of freedoms of association, assembly, expression, and opinion over the last 3 decades has created a climate of fear. As a result, there are no independent media outlets, civil society organizations, or political parties in Eritrea. Freedom of religion or belief is repressed, with periodic waves of arrest, of mass arrest, and efforts to control all aspects of religious life and institutions. The situation of Eritrean victims of enforced disappearance remains extremely concerning. Hundreds of families of disappeared Eritreans live with agony of uncertainty. This is the plight of dozens of Eritrean Muslim leaders and teachers disappeared since the 90s. Religious figures, political dissidents, journalists like Siam